was quick.
Okay. Good to be back. Make some of the same comments every time. You need to raise your hand or ask questions as we go, because if something's unclear and it doesn't make sense, then for you, then it probably doesn't for somebody else. And I'm in this stuff all the time, so it makes perfect sense to me, but it may not be to you. You're going to see, I do this for you folks every year. It's going to be a lot of the same tables and graphs and stuff that you always see. I don't know how to present this stuff differently each year, so a lot of it's going to look the same, but you just kind of get a little update of what you normally get. Did you advance?
I just advanced it.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll just start with our stocking. That's always the big topic. Usually that's one of the most asked questions. What are we doing for stocking? So I have some numbers up there, and I'm going to have to nod to you, I guess,
Sure.
when it's time to hit the
You just tell me when you want to go to the next.
All right. So, and this is usually at this point, I go ahead and tell you what our plans are, but I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to wait till later. I'm kind of saving up the pain for a little later in the presentation. Okay. It started, I think we've got 4 or 5 years now that, go ahead, one more, that we've done some boat stocking, and this is stuff that the club is asked to do or recommended, and we worked on for a number of years. So we've been trying to boat stock, and when we got into this, our plan was to try and stock out of the boat most all the fish. A gentleman at the hatchery that runs the hatchery got a boat, and he said, I think we can stock them all that way. Well, the way it turns out is these ponds are being emptied, and this process, that time of year at the hatchery, is extremely busy. They've got people on staff 24/7. It never ends. And when it actually gets down to reality, everybody's busy, and it ends up that we've got fish coming and going, and we can't always get them all stocked out of the boat. So since we've been doing it, we've been getting back and forth, different numbers. This is what the hatchery has set up on the boat. This is what their boat normally looks like that they've been stocking them out of. They put these little net things inside these tanks, and they run water from the generator into those tanks and keep the water flowing through. And then the fish are kind of pushed out these little holes in these pipes. They're always fighting the current, so if you just run water through, you can go for hours and you don't hardly lose any fish, because they start getting to that current and they want to get out, so you have to kind of coax them out. So that's what those guys are doing. And then sometimes in a bind, we just go to the old redneck approach. My boat, we'll throw some trash cans in there and put some aerators in there and go around, and when we do that, I usually just dump the whole trash can at some location, and when we dump them all, we'll go back and get some more. But that's kind of the process that we're handling fish. This year, the guy at hatchery is always trying to get something new, which is great, because that's really helped advance the few things that are going on in the hatchery and trying to fix some problems. But he went to a different tank this year, so what he was using this year, and I don't know what he's going to come up with next year. He had one much larger tank in the middle last year that he was doing something else with, but that's generally the process. All right. Switching to our sampling, what we do. This is catch rates out of our gill nets. How many people in here have helped with that? Okay. A few of you have. This is the age group that we're targeting with our gill net every year. We get more fish than this, but this is our target. We're looking at fish that are 1.5 years old. That's what our nets are designed to catch mostly, is that size group. The 6-month-old fish that we had stocked 6 months or so before we do this sampling, we get some of those, but traditionally the numbers we get, they don't recruit to those nets well, and they don't tell us a very good story. We get the best story at this age, so that's what we're targeting. We don't set a bunch of big nets to catch all the other fish, because you guys, I'll tell you about that later. But that's kind of how it is. Now, you can see it goes all over the place, what we catch in our gill nets.
What's a normal length of year and a half striper that you're looking at?
They're usually about 17 inches when we're collecting. So in the fall, we net once in October, once in November, once in December. And October one, they might be half an inch on average, smaller than the ones in December, but they usually average right around 17 inches.
Sorry.
Okay, before you go any farther, this was just something I had just in my brain. Can you go back one? All right, these numbers obviously bounce all over the place, but our stocking rates bounce all over the place too. But I got wondering how well does our catch rates kind of match up with what we actually stock? So you can go ahead. One more. The red dots are the stocking numbers. Uh-oh. These red dots are the stocking numbers. So these red dots correspond to this side, and blue corresponds to that side. The last 4 or 5 years, they've matched up pretty well. They kind of hit right on. You can see historically, it's all over the place. But there's been a number of upgrades and improvements in the hatchery, and different things have been going on over time, that these stocking rates are starting to match up a whole lot better and closer. So when we put a number of fish in, that's usually close to what we see coming back out the other end. That was just kind of the anecdotal thing that I was curious about, because it seemed like things matched up better, so I just plotted it out, and it did. If we throw all the fish we caught in our nets in and don't worry just about the age ones, this is what it turns out to be. So if we're just looking at the age ones, it was more down here, but you include all the fish, and it was hit right almost exactly on the average for the last 20 years.
Dan, how about variables when you do your gill nets? If rainy day, sunny day, muddy water, clear water, we had a storm just roll through, it's a beginning of a front. Do you analyze information like that for her?
No. I used to look at some of that, and it's just way too much noise and too much hassle, and you don't really see that much. And that's part of doing it 3 different times, is that kind of evens that out. Because sometimes we do go out and set a net and go, man, that just didn't seem to do well. But then the next round is a little bit more, so they tend to average out if you get a bad night, which does happen, but we do it several times. So the nets are all catching probably 95% of their fish after dark, because they're set in fairly shallow water, and it's when the fish come up shallow to feed at night. So during the day, which we set them in the afternoon one day and pull them in the morning, but they're in the daylight hours for some time. But if we set them at 2 o'clock and then went back and pulled them right before dark, there wouldn't be hardly a fish in. Everything hits the nets at night, because that just seems to be when they come up shallow to actually get active.
Do you set them in the same place all the time?
Same exact place. If we didn't, because some places fish a lot better than others, there's certain points, certain areas of the lake where fish will visit more frequently at night. So we do use the same areas. There's other states that have tried, you get with statistical whizzes, and they'll tell you, well, you need to randomly do all this stuff to really get a true population of what's going on, or picture what's going on out there. For stripers, it doesn't work very well for us, because you can put them in one spot and they're not going to hardly do anything. You go to another spot and they do well. So we put them in spots, the same exact spots that produce fish that always have. Because that takes a lot of variability out. So we're not trying to actually find out how many fish are in the lake. We're just trying to find out how it looks compared to each year over time. The young guys that I was talking about, I track that data and I look at it, but I never really do much with it, because over the years, what we see out of these guys hasn't really corresponded very well at all to what we see later on, with the exception. Go ahead. I have noticed now, after doing it enough, looking at it enough years, if we get one of these years, one of these high years, all these high years ended up producing good numbers of fish. So these guys down here, we don't know whether those are gonna turn out to be way up here the next year or way down low. It doesn't seem to follow much of a pattern. However, if we did catch a lot of small fish, that means that's gonna be a good year for class. And the only reason I really bring that up is because we had almost, a really high number from what we stocked last year. We caught a lot of those guys. So based on everything we've seen for over 20 years, that means we got another good group of fish coming up from the ones that were stocked last
You
year.
correlate that to boat stocking by any chance?
Say it again.
Greater survival, greater numbers from stocking by boat?
I can't make that hurdle yet. The numbers on the boat stocking, we don't have enough years and it hasn't been consistent enough.
Okay.
One year we get 70% of them stocked that way, the next year is 30%. If even going back and forth like that, if we do it, if I get another 20, maybe 10 years of that, I might be able to say something. If we could do it all 100% out of the boat, I could probably do it in 4 years and tell you that. It's been so variable.
What would be your goal to see the 100%? Set your goal.
That would be nice to do it. If I could, I would do 100% out of the boat for 3 or 4 years and just see how that compares.
Can we help you make that
improve
happen?
it? I'm sorry?
Can we help you make that happen?
No, it's just, it's really lack of resources on our end because we can't really just give you one of our boats and say, here's a boat to go ahead and stock.
I was thinking about giving mine to you.
It's time for us. We're just not available.
Okay.
Springtime is real busy for us, so we're rolling in springtime, and then the hatcheries, they're rolling, and sometimes they're calling up and saying, we're fishing, we're sending out, we've got 400,000 more than we thought coming out of those 2 ponds. We've got people going that part of the state and this part of the state, and we just need somebody to grab a truck and unload some fish. It's just personnel on our end, so
Okay.
I appreciate that. And if we could have done some of that, I would have tried to work with the club before. But we've tried some bass stockings using the public, and it just ends up being really difficult to actually pull it off and have everything survive and do well. Those 1.5-year-olds that I was talking about, this is our gillnet catches again, so I just wanted to throw up there, this is what we caught last year, and it shows, most of our fish were these 1-year-olds. Here's those 6-month-old fish, some 2s and 3s, and then we don't have really anything out here. But I just wanted to highlight that group one more. Last year we got a whole bunch of age 1s, but that's because we stocked 30,000 the year before, and they did really well. So last year, those numbers were really high. In 2021, we had a lot lower numbers stocked, and it shows up that we caught less fish.
The bigger fish there tailing off, isn't that partly because your nets are designed not to catch them?
Yes. For those of you who have actually helped us, the nets have basically holes in them of a certain size. They're very specific on the size of the holes. So fishes of certain sizes go into them and get stuck. They can get started in, but they can't get through. If the fish is too big, he doesn't get in the hole. He basically bounces off the net and goes on. If he's a lot smaller, he just goes right on through the hole. So we have several size nets, and they're designed really for these two. Right? Well, they actually catch some of those fish.
Sorry.
All right, you can leave it there. This right here, this little box is the gillnet data that I showed from 2022. I just scaled it down. I changed the scale over here. But that's basically the same graph shrunk down to itty bitty. Okay, go ahead. What we don't know from our gillnet data is all this stuff. So we catch these fish, we know what's coming from our stocking, we know them as the first year or two, we know basically what to expect and what you're going. But we don't have any idea what's happening with the rest of the population. So that's where the angler diaries come in, and that's a lot of what I talk about when I come here is the angler diaries, because they give us this picture. So now we know from our work, we can tell you what's coming, but we can't tell you what's happening on the rest of the population. Mostly what you're fishing for is these guys out here, these bigger ones. Out here. And so this kind of lines up. It's not a surprise because of recent stockings. We've had pretty good stocking rates, and the survival has been better in the last 4 or 5 years than it has been in a long, long time. So it's kind of been a double whammy of we're getting really good survival, and we jacked up our numbers a little bit. Consequently, a lot of this is a couple of people have mentioned. We're finding a whole lot of these low 20-some inch fish, which is what shows up here too, and that's from that couple of good year classes that we just had. So we do have a lot of small fish coming in. And this, go back one more, and this is typical that it tails off after you get past 30 inches. That's pretty normal. We try and keep this number up here, decent size. We don't want them all to fall away right here. But this is kind of our trophy management part of the lake. We want to make bigger fish a part of the fishery. We don't want to make the whole fishery all be 30 plus inches, but we always want to make sure we have some of those, a decent number of those fish in the system. All right, one more. Another clip from the diaries. This shows, of all the data I get in, the blue part of the lines, that's what people released, and then the red part is what they actually harvested. And partly because a lot of people want to keep the big fish, a lot of them let them go even when they don't have to. But another part is the regulations force people to let fish go past this point. So a lot of these big fish are released, and most of those that are kept during the summer when survival is not going to be good anyway. And obviously, most people don't want to keep 12, 14-inch fish. So it's no surprise that most of the fish that are being harvested are in those mid-20s, low to upper 20-inch range. And it's about, if you look up here, fish that are 20 inches and better, it seems like most anglers don't want to plan on keeping a lot of fish less than 20 inches if they're keeping fish to eat. That's kind of a cutoff for a lot of anglers. And it's like 70% of the fish that are caught are put back. Okay. This is kind of where this is a little bit unusual. Okay, for the whole year, this is when these fish that were harvested, when it actually took place. I got it color-coded because this is when we want people to keep their fish during these really hot months. The purple's kind of in between, depending on the year and the weather. Sometimes June can be a little rough on them, sometimes October, but these are the real crucial months, and that's when we want people to normally release. I was a little surprised that it was so much in April. I don't know if people got hungry in the winter and they had to stock up after the long winter. Their freezers were empty, so they started keeping a few more, but that's basically where our harvest is. All right, I've been showing these slides for a number of years. Who was here last year? Okay, good share. So this is repeats. This is what the population looked like back in 2014. The red line there is just for a mental marker. It doesn't mean anything. It's just kind of to keep an idea of where this graph is moving around over time. So I'm starting back a number of years ago. We had too many stripers at that time, and they stopped growing, and we were running out of bait. Our bait was real low. The stripers weren't growing. That's why there's so many fish right here. And then we had a slot limit back then from 26 to 36 inches. So once they got to here, in the cool months, you couldn't keep them anymore. Well, it was right here. It was actually the slot. But we were protecting a lot of those fish that couldn't grow anymore, and they were getting stunted. So you could take a 27, 28-inch fish back then, and he might be 5 years old. He might be 10 years old. They were just kind of marching along. And then they kind of get up here in this zone, and then they just run it. They were out of food, and they just quit growing. So they just sat there. The year classes just kept stacking up and piling up in that size range.
If conditions will cause the fish to stunt in a particular year, does that inhibit them from growing as much in later years?
For some species, it doesn't, but I'm finding out from stripers, yeah, a lot of those that got stunted, the bait came back, and things were good, life was good, and they were still. I got one fish this year from the anglers, from our striped bass heads. It was 18, 19 years old, and it was still like 28, 29 inches. So, yeah, he got stuck. There's some of them that pop out of it and go, but most of them are just getting stuck. Once whatever happens in their system, once they start stunting out, they're not coming out of it. Now, we've had other species. We've taken crappie that have gotten stunted and been in stunted lakes and put them in a good environment, and they just pick up and take right off. Now, they've lost a number of years of their life for growing, so their potential is lost. But they pick up and go again, where some of these stripers just don't seem to ever get out of it. Yes.
Is there a relation possibly to some of the parasites and stuff that you know have been in the lake over the years? I caught one last week that had some kind of strange like blood specks on on the mucus on both sides last week.
It's possible. I don't expect. I mean, it could be because we see healthy fish with some parasites too that are growing really well and in great shape. So I doubt that would be the reason. It's always a possibility, but it just seems to be a pattern now that some of those fish that got stuck years ago just never come out of it. And I don't think those fish are especially ridden with parasites any more than anybody else. And they had the same resources available, but there could be something odd like that going on that, you know, their conditions have just allowed them to get infected more, be unhealthy, and it continues to affect them, whatever it is.
Is that a one-off that I saw last week? That little blood specks. Has anybody else seen any of those? I hadn't seen that before.
I'm not sure what that. I mean, that's not ringing a bell. So
Okay. Yeah, it was odd.
Generally in the top of the back when you open it up.
No, it was exterior too.
Why do you say that?
Yeah.
it was on that.
It was on the outside of the fish. Yeah,
Oh, it was on the very outside.
Yeah, little blood specks all.
Oh,
all
okay.
up and down.
That is generally a bacterial viral infection. Is when you see that. There is infections, stuff that causes infections in fish in the water all the time.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like us. There's pneumonia is all over the place. And people that are most susceptible to it have low immune systems. And so, but it's an environment and our bodies just fight it off. And it's the same thing with the fish, but sometimes they do get sick for whatever reason. And obviously if their health is poor and they're not feeding it as much, they're more susceptible to that stuff. But generally what we see when a fish is infected, if they start getting sick, a lot of times that's what you see. You'll see outside spots like that, some blood, some funny marks, red spots, and sometimes lesions will break out on fish too. But yeah, that's usually an indication that he's got some kind of infection.
That was the Chesapeake Bay 20 years ago. Lots of sores on the fish.
Yeah.
You mentioned 18, 19 years. What's the lifespan? What have you found in your, how old have you found them to be?
The oldest one I've seen is 24, 25 years. I think 24 is the oldest fish I've
Didn't I
ever
send
seen.
you one that was 26 inches and 26 years or something like that?
I think it was more like 18 and 29, or 18 years old and 28, 29 inches, I believe, something like that. I don't think it was quite as drastic as the number. I haven't seen one like what you just said, upper 20s. And
I know it was 26 inches long because I
Okay,
saved
that
the
could have
head.
been the one that was 18 years old. I don't know. I can't remember. I've got thousands of numbers in my head. And I can't remember. Yes.
Those may be a stupid question.
No,
How do you tell the age of the fish?
okay. There is a bone in their head. It's an ear bone. We call it a nodulate. It's kind of a round structure. There's two of them in the fish's head, and that provides them balance, and it's used a little bit for hearing, vibration. But we have inner ear bones also. So that's when somebody has an inner ear infection, they lose their balance. Fish have these bones, and it's just a hard piece of calcium that free floats in a little capsule in their head. When we remove those out when we're doing our gill nets, and then when people save me striped bass heads, I can take them out of those. And they have rings on them just like a tree does.
Okay.
So we take that thing out and look at it under a scope, and sometimes we have to file them down and do different things. But yeah.
Anyone who would like to volunteer for that, it's a super clean, great smelling job.
In other words, he wants it out.
I wouldn't mind.
All right, keep moving.
Okay. The last one was, go back one more so I can continue the kind of the process. Okay.
So 14.
All right, 14. Now flip to 15. 15, we changed the slot limit to make a lot of these more open for harvest, but we still got a lot of these above the red line. And we don't have many new fish coming in. That was a number of things, stocking, real low survival on stocking, but there's not that many fish coming in, and we don't have many fish out here either. So they're just stacked up in here. Okay, again. All right, jump 2 more years. All of a sudden, this graph looks a little different. We've still got a couple in those middle, those old timers that are still not growing out of it, but this side, notice above that, it's not huge, but there's a lot more of these only in a couple years than there was. And this block is getting much thinner. And in 17, all of a sudden things started getting good again. The fish started growing. These younger fish coming up had good growth rates again. A few of these were breaking out and going, and our shad numbers were back up. Okay, hit it again. 18, it's still, we jumped up another year, and this is even thinning out. Look at all these bigger sizes up here. So we got growth again, and people are finally, year after year of harvesting these fish out, and some of them moving on. Things are doing really well at this point. This is one of the highlights as far as growth and condition and forage and shad, and everything's popping really nice right here. Go again. Okay, fast forward to now. This thing's filling up. Not only is this starting to fill up, this is really filled up back here, where we didn't have hardly any of those before. So this screen is kind of getting busy again, and consequently, we're going right back into the old pattern of we've lost our bait, and the growth is going right back down again. So
How do you analyze your shad?
Pardon?
How do you analyze your shad numbers?
We go out with a shocking boat, and we shock shad about the end of August, 1st of September. So it's done with electricity. What your mama told you not to do is play with electricity water. We make a living out of it. That's how we collect our shad. Okay. All right, so kind of looking at the bad year here in 15, and it's, I mean, the shapes aren't the same, but the issue of there's a lot of blue in there is the same. I mean, we're looking at the same problem coming up. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, Dan,
Yes.
back up just a second. When you were talking about the bait, area, you shock them.
Mhm.
Do you do the same method there as you do with the gill net? You try to hit the same areas all the time,
Yes.
so you're getting a good. Okay.
Yep, we have a patch of sites that we do, the same sites down in the lower end, down around Crag Creek in the lower end of the lake, and then we have some middle sites up around the
Gotcha.
state park area, and then we have some up around Mormons, some in mid-lake around the bridge and Indian Creek area. So we have them scattered out, but we shock the same sites for the same reason.
Okay.
Some even shocking. I mean, it's not quite as drastic as the nets, but even when you're shocking fish, all the sites aren't the same.
Thank
So
you.
what's the reason for shad being up sometimes and down, and others just more feeding, or the fish are, I mean, yeah, it's just, there's a lot of variables, I guess, them surviving better with more shad, or?
When you say being up, you mean like shallow versus deep?
Numbers, yeah.
Oh, the numbers are all about who's eating them.
Okay, yeah.
If nobody's eating them, the numbers will stay almost flatline. Because they reproduce at such incredibly high numbers that you can take almost all the shad out of here. If we could just magically go out and I could just magically tonight just take away 90% of the shad, As soon as spawning season comes in June, they have different, a little bit different, but it'll all be completely refilled as much as it can hold by September. You know, none of the other fish the predators can't do that. But lower on the food chain, that's just part of the way nature works. The bottom of the food chain has to replenish a whole lot quicker than the top of the food chain. But yeah, they can eat it down and then it'll just pop right back.
Is that how you predict how many of the stockings, the numbers of the stockings, is what the bait fish?
That's part of it, yes. There's, I think I mentioned that somewhere later on, but if I don't, it's trying to put all these pieces together. It's the stocking numbers. You know, what are we seeing the last year or two? Not only what we put in, but did they survive well? Because sometimes we put a bunch in, but they didn't do well. This year we put a kind of a moderate number in, but it looks like they did really well. Looking at the bait's a huge one. Bait and growth are the two big things. If fish aren't growing and the bait's not there, you know, that's pretty much 2 strikes, and I would count that as all 3. Those 2 combined are just one by itself is really alarming. If the growth isn't as good, that usually means something. But when you see bad growth and bad bait, I mean, they match up pretty good.
Like them white perch, I know this ain't a striper thing, but it's a striper question. Those white perch, I go to catch those things in the summertime. And this summer, I bet you I didn't catch 5 of those little small ones. Is them stripers eating those things too?
They're just not reproducing. When they first showed up on the scene, their numbers were through the roof. They were just everywhere. And I was seeing them for probably 3 years before I started getting phone calls. Because we started seeing them like this, and then the next year they're like that, and the next year like that. And then the next year, all of a sudden, everybody's getting them on their lines. And everybody, where did these come from? Well, I've been already seeing them for several years. They just hadn't got really big enough for people to start catching them. But after those first few years, we saw lots of fish because there's lots of adults. But as they moved through, there hasn't been new ones coming in behind them. There's occasionally here and there, but they're just numbers of just 10.
In everything you read about those white perch, like they are supposed to be prolific spawners, and they just didn't.
They're not anymore. For the last probably 5 or 6 years, there's been very limited spawning success for those. And they probably are prolific spawners in their native habitats, but this really isn't their native habitat. But for whatever reason, they have done good at times, but they're fading back out now. Their numbers are just
All of a sudden, 6-7 years ago, Bugs Island, could wear them out.
Yeah, Leesville Lake is still they just keep persisting down there. Those numbers stay really high down there, but they popped up here and then they're fading out.
So they were not stopped.
They got here not by us.
God.
I take that back. They may have actually been stopped by us. Somebody could have put them in. We've got people putting them in. They show up in places that people don't even know lakes exist. For some reason, they still show up there because people put them in. We were years ago getting some mixed in with our stripers, and they may have got put in that way. So it could have been our fault for doing that. Some of our batches of stripers years ago, they would pump river into the ponds that we're raising our fingerlings in, and sometimes those with the eggs or something would get in there, and so when they go to pull the pond out and you'd have a load of stripers on, they'd find a couple little white perch. So it's very possible our agency put them in unknowingly.
I ran into quite a few of them this past year, though. Here in the last few months, white perch showed back up pretty good. And Betty's for sure. Becky's have been doing too. Right there, anywhere around that Beacon and all that. They show up pretty good.
They're still there, and we still see them, but I'm.
Fisher was trying to put, if you didn't cut it down a little piece of bacon, I figure what you was messing with, that no, they're here, and they did show back up this year. I saw a lot of them actually.
For both electrofishing and gill nets, I'm probably somewhere between 20 and 30% of what I was seeing numbers wise
Yeah, okay.
from
I agree with that.
like 5 years ago.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too, but this year I've seen more, because a couple years it didn't, and then all of a sudden, they showed up in the spots and they sat there for a couple months. I mean, you have to be real careful fishing on them because you think you're fishing them too long.
Yeah, I've been catching a few myself, but all our sampling shows, and I'm not seeing the smaller ones coming through.
I'm not
the
saying
place.
like the word image, I remember 5 years ago, you cut them citations on the regular.
Yeah, all the time. And I don't think they're dropping off to the point they're just gonna disappear, but I think from what I'm seeing, the numbers are gonna be pretty limited, you know, it's gonna be back down to probably where it should be.
So Dan, is the ideal curve then to have the same number, a square function all the way across? Is
That's not attainable.
I know it's not attainable, but is that your ideal so that each year the fish continue to grow in the same rates?
My ideal condition is that we have a lake, 10 fish, you know, like 15 pounds under every boat. But the reality is, it's still, yeah, I've been looking at this same data and doing this in this office for 23 years now, and there is no perfect thing because you get a bunch on this end and you got to cut back somewhere else. And trying to make it all look kind of square, I don't have any.
Yeah, but I mean,
Really-
so trying to take fish within a certain slot limit each year doesn't necessarily correspond to increased growth of the lower levels of fish or things like that necessarily.
Now, what we keep running into is, I give you, I guess, a couple scenarios. Yeah, we had the fish kill years ago, and that just kind of started everything back down to basic. And the bait went back up, growth went back up, and everything was doing well. So we started doing this, you know, making a whole bunch of these guys. And for a while, it was okay. That number of fish seemed to be okay until they got up here in these bigger sizes. And then all of a sudden, this same group, now they're twice as big, they need twice as much food. So we're thinking, you know, that looks really good, but now they need twice as much, and that same group of fish, it can't support it anymore. Another thing that came up is we've got this many fish coming in thinking we're okay, and now people don't harvest as many fish as they used to. Folks, which is a good thing that people have gotten conservation minded, because we can't have big ones out there. You know, to get these really nice fish, they need to be out there 10 years. And these fish are caught constantly. And if people are keeping them all, it doesn't matter how good your growth is, we don't get big fish anymore because they go home to it. So I don't know what the perfect thing is. This is not perfect because we lost our big fish and we're not getting growth. It's trying to find some happy medium of keeping enough guys coming in and managing that with how many fish are leaving and dying and everything else. Kind of keep this peak off. Keep enough moving in that you got good production over here without ending up. Which, if I was probably better at my job, I should have been able to do that by now. But I've had a hard time doing that.
Fight Mother Nature.
Yeah. And it's been interesting because when we first started after the fish kill, I'm kind of going with the narrative that back then it was 80%, now we have 70% release, and back then it was 80% harvest. So you kind of set up, I had models and everything else that kind of showed how everything should progress, and all of a sudden we made people release with our regulations, and people said, well, I don't really mind doing that. I'll fish more and release fish, and it completely just threw the whole model out. So we started pumping fish in the system with kind of the thought process of what had historically been going on in the lake, and it just blew up because all of a sudden we made you guys behave differently, and it completely changed how everything works. So every time I try and make a move, there's some kind of consequence on the other side of it that follows things up.
Hey Dan, one question I have about the difference between 2015 and now is that it seems like in 2015 there may have been a few bluebacks around, but they are definitely prevalent and well established now compared to 2015. Now, we've always had the rise and fall of the threadfin. You are taking into account just the gizzard shad, right? In your shopping. So,
Well, I'm looking at the threadfin too, but I don't get the blueback.
right. Is there any way to count those, or not count those, but to put some sort of figure on what the bluebacks are? Because you and I have talked so many times about how since the blueback population has increased, the bass and the striper behave different. Is there any way to put some sort of number or quantity on the blueback, or is it
It
just
is possible to sample, but I don't want to spend the time on it. It's an enormous amount of time.
Right.
Essentially, you have to set deep water gills.
right? And that's probably
They are
tough
a hassle.
because of the trees.
We can find a few holes to put nets,
Right.
but looked at this data pretty extensively with just the gizzard shad. If I just concentrate on that one fish on one side, and it's specifically an adult gizzard shad, not what was spawned this year, but an adult gizzard shad. The relationship between those numbers and striped bass growth is almost beyond what we ever see in statistics for any kind of fisheries. It's through the roof, and I'll show that later. What I'm telling him is that the relationship that we have seen from 20 years worth of data between an adult gizzard shad and striped bass growth is right on. I mean, they match each other phenomenal. You could give that data to a statistician or biology work outside, this out of a lab. The numbers on it and the statistics on it are like lab numbers. They're so good. But we'll get to that. But that's one of the reasons I haven't tried to even get that information, knowing that those bluebacks are there, and it still has not affected that trend at all. That trend still holds. Yes.
What about the number of people fishing for stripers now compared to 20 years ago?
Very high. It was a lot 20 years ago, but it's even higher now.
And we have more fun tools to use too.
Yeah, and you're a whole lot better at it than technology. That's been one of the challenges to growing bigger fish. Was years ago that was one of the issues in consternation between our agency and the stocking rates and the public. They said, you just put more fish in, we're going to have bigger fish, because the lake is known for trophy fish, and historically it's always produced big fish. Well, those big fish numbers started going down, and the public said, well, if you just put more in, we'll get more big fish. Well, the problem is they needed to live 12 to 15 years, and when you start running the numbers, when every fish that gets caught gets harvested, there's no way to make big fish because you couldn't make it stay in the lake long enough. The last time we did tagging, fish that was over 30 inches, 90% of them were caught again within 1 year. They're caught that much. So trying to make a citation fish when as soon as they get to 30 inches, they're out of the system, it just doesn't add up. Does that answer your question? The way that the public and anglers use the lake now with catch and release and our size limits and all that kind of stuff, we get plenty of old fish. We just got to keep making them grow. So the number of people fishing has gone up. The technology's improved, so people are better at it. A whole lot more of them get caught. But since there's so many more people that release fish, it's probably not any more detrimental than it was. Probably having less of an impact than they were 20 years ago, even though there's more people doing it. Okay, get into the growth part, which is just keeps revolving back around. Same slide as I used last year, and I kept it because I already had an illustration in it, and it was easy to demonstrate what we've already been talking about. This line is just kind of a average that's drawn through mechanically when you just plot the graph. Gives you an idea of kind of where that thing's going over time. But what I want to highlight on this is, go ahead and hit it. These fish are from the slow years when they weren't growing. And this is kind of what it does. If we lose growth, this is what ends up happening. I've got 13, 14-year-old fish. I got a 16-year-old fish. They're the same size as a 5-year-old fish. Our growth is good in 21. We've had several years of good growth, and that's why we got these right here. But these guys are still hanging around, and that's what it does to the system. So if we continue on with lack of forage and all that, then that's basically what happens is, my thing doesn't work, is this line will come up and they'll just do this. And you just don't get big fish produced. We've got to have food eat. Okay, go ahead. This is what it looked like in this year. All those red dots are all those fish that Chad says he wants somebody else to help do this year. The blue dots are what we collect in our gill nets. And this is line a little bit lower than last year's. One more. What we should be seeing is more of these fish going up. We should be seeing more in here. There should be more dots up here. Now, all fish don't grow the same, just like people. You know, one person's 5 foot, one person's 6 foot. We don't all grow the same. So there's a lot of variability. You're going to have a fish down here and a fish up there. But some of these better growers should be up there in that top right-hand corner, and they're not. Okay.
Does pollution have any say-so in the growth?
Nope. There isn't anything that I'm aware of out there as far as pollution that would disrupt their growth. This line is where fish have been in the best case scenarios in Smith Mountain Lake, going back historically. They can do this, and this is what they do at Leesville Lake. Still now. This is where it was in 2015, this green line, and this blue line is where we're at now. We're slipping right down to some of our all-time lows, so we're headed in the wrong direction right now as far as growth. And again, why does it matter? Well, we've got like a 5-inch difference right now, and it could mean the difference of whether that 10-year-old fish is 10 pounds or 18 pounds. So it makes a big difference. You know, a few inches of growth makes a big difference in a fish. Go ahead. All right, going to your bait question. And if you do this, run all the numbers on it, you can kind of see the bait's up, the growth goes up. The bait's going back down, the growth goes down. And we had the same, this is when the fish kill was back here. So we kind of cleaned the slate. And in 2003, we had way too many fish. And that's one of the reasons we had the fish kill.
What killed the fish?
We had way too many. We've been stocking 450,000 fish for 4 or 5 years, and the growth was, they were in bad shape. Then we had a new parasite that came in, and with the high numbers of fish, they got incredibly infected with the parasites. So between being sick and being heavily infected with the parasites, it just wiped them out. Really, mostly the only survivors were pretty much the young teenagers. It wiped out all the big ones.
Was it a wintertime kill?
It was springtime. And we had trendfin shad back then. That was about the only bait that was left, and then they winter killed that year, so we had almost no bait left. And then the fish were really sick, and then they got these parasites. And what it does is their mouth would fill up with all these bugs, but it would irritate their gills. And so their gills would get all covered with a heavy, heavy slime coat, and essentially it made it really hard for them to breathe. So the respiration, in order just to get enough oxygen in their blood, the respiration shot through the roof, and they don't have anything to eat and they're already sick, and it was enough to wipe them out. Now, the young kids and the teenagers, a lot of those survived because they're so much more vibrant, but it wiped out the older fish.
Around that same time, we had an extremely low water too.
don't know if anything to do with it.
We did, because it was right at the end of the drought, and that was another thing that helped with the bait, is had drought conditions, which really reduced the amount of nutrients that came in the lake, which further reduced the amount of bait in the lake, and it's just, the whole thing's compounded all together, and it all just hit in one, everything piled up at one time, and it was enough to pretty much wipe the fishery out. Go back one. Okay, back on this. Just kind of people see the general trends with the bait, and okay, go ahead. This is just picking out catch rates from the diaries of fish over 30 inches. You know, our growth was getting back, it picked back up in 16, our growth was getting better, so all of a sudden our catch rates, we start getting more 30-inch fish. And the catch rates, the lower this thing is, the more 30-inch fish you were catching out there. Come to 2020, that's when the bait started going south, and since then the catch rates of those bigger fish, it's taken a little bit more than twice as long to catch one of those now as it did just a few years ago, and that's just because of growth. The fish are not growing again, so we're not making those bigger fish like we were. So we've got this issue with the bait crashing. I think we're going to have a lot of fish coming up from last year's stocking again. So you guys' catch rates are up right now. We've got good fish coming in. The forage is down, the growth is down, and the number of bigger fish is going down. So all that combined, that's my stocking rate this year. So I wanted to go through this whole song and dance to give you that. Yeah, well, actually, what I consider a normal stocking is 350, just a little less.
So how many fish is that per acre?
That's about 10 per acre. So if I was doing this in my own little vacuum and didn't have anybody to answer to, I'd probably say just skip it this year. I'm that concerned.
Because you don't want the young fish in there to take the food away from the fish.
I just don't want to keep. I don't want to keep adding to the problem. This has really gotten me concerned right there. This constant slope, and the bait's done the same thing. It's not doing what it should be. So I'm just really concerned about where we're going, the health of the fish.
So how many are going in this year?
That's my number right now.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
Is bait something that can be stocked in this lake?
Nope. I mean, theoretically, yes. But you need train load after train load after train load. And then you'd have to do it forever. Yes, there'd be no ending to it. You just couldn't do enough. But they reproduce in such high numbers. They'll be there if we just lighten up on the mouths they're eating. Just don't overbrowse it. It's just like a pasture with cows. You got a pasture that can hold 50 cows, and you put 100 in there, you're not going to have enough. You can keep throwing them grass, but nature is not going to sustain it. And we could theoretically buy train loads of fish, but we'd be married to it forever.
Do you want to encourage people to keep more of the small or younger age classes, 18, 20-inch fish?
It'd probably be a good idea right now to keep, 20 to upper 20s right now, because there's a lot of biomass in stripers all through that 20-inch range. I don't want to encourage people to take the limited number of really big fish we have. But harvest right now wouldn't be a bad idea. We could use a few less fish out there because they're in there, and until somebody catches them and keeps them, the problem's going to continue.
Right. So Dan, the concern that I have, and it probably is a concern from the whole group here, is if our number goes to 225, when could we resume normal stocking? Is that something that you've got to see the improvement in the overall fishery?
It's just like before. I mean, this isn't. I don't know if I've stocked that few before, but it's just like what we've been doing right along. if I went back all the way and plotted out my stocking numbers, they've gone up and down for 20-some years, for 30-some years.
So that's not a forever and ever
No.
amen number. Okay.
No, we've always, that's why we're in this problem to begin with, because everybody else in the country that manages striped bass doesn't do this to their system. Nobody else pushes their system where they keep falling off the edge and things go south. Everybody stocks a whole lot less fish where you never have to worry about too many fish in the water.
Is the lack of bait potentially also tied to other predator fish? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of largemouth.
There is a lot of largemouth, but the shad base, the largemouth are eating those too. But most of the shad are open water, and the amount of that gets eaten by other predators is very limited compared to what they produce. That's how really stripers got started in these reservoirs, because there's all this shad out there. It doesn't matter how many bass or crop you have. You have this massive amount of shad that doesn't get used by anybody. And here's a fish that we can put in stripers or hybrid stripers that will stay out and away from the shoreline and consume a lot of that fish that nobody else is using. Those things are normally, if you don't have a striper or something in these big reservoirs, those fish are just out there dying of old age, most of them. Yeah, they get eaten by other fish, but it's just a very small portion of them that get eaten compared to what naturally, nature provides.
Now, that 225 that you're suggesting for this year, how many years will you have to run that to see the results? You can't just do that for 1 year and expect to see results, I would think. That's going to be something you're going to do for multiple years, isn't it?
Probably, but just like we've been showing, the growth and the numbers coming up and all those different things we're watching that. So
couldn't do it just 1 year and jump back to the other.
now doing it 1 year,
So you're looking at doing this for a multiple time frame. That's what I'm getting at.
probably to some extent. I don't know what it would kind of see how actually this year class, the ones we just stocked, it looks like there's a bunch of them coming. So we'll catch them when they're year and a half and see, if that's through the roof again. Yeah, I'll really probably want to go low. If it's not as fast as we think it is, and the bait starts looking a little better this year, that it doesn't have to stay very long. But it's just like what we've been doing. We watch it every year, and I'm certainly not, even though I'd like to just not stop in and try and correct it as quick as possible. It wouldn't be fair to just say I'm just going to plan on doing this for many years, because I'm not. I'm watching the numbers all the time, and if things start to turn around.
I was just saying, just to get a real feel for it, there's no way you can just do it in 1 year. I guess
1 year won't fix the whole problem.
When you really get the data to correctly be able to see what you're doing is working.
Yeah, and I could stand up here next year and say we need to do the same thing, or maybe we can things aren't as bad as I thought they were going to be, and we could start moving it up.
Could the blueback numbers influence some of the gizzard numbers?
I have never seen where it does.
They use different parts of the lake. The thread fins and the gizzards do.
Yeah, those two interact a lot.
Can you talk about what you think happened in the cold snap this year to the remainder of the thread fins that probably left the system from up the river and what you expect?
Actually got a section.
Cool.
Well, I was just wondering why this winter all the fish I've caught have been really fat and chubby. They've been the healthiest fish I've seen in 40 years.
And a lot of slots.
Plenty of bait.
There's
slot fish.
Yeah.
There is a couple reasons, especially right now. The threadfin, they've been away from the stripers all summer because they like the hottest water. So they've been up. The threadfin numbers going into the winter were pretty good. Gizzard shad and the other options, no. But going into the winter, those threadfin shad were in pretty good shape because they'd stayed away from the stripers all summer. They don't do cold weather well. If you're on the upper ends of the lake, we actually had a lot of kills from the threadfins because it got too cold for them. But the threadfin this time of year, now the stripers can get to them because they can move up to those areas. They can mix in with the temperatures, don't keep them away anymore. And you combine that with the thread fins are struggling in the winter. A lot of them are dying. They're not functioning well, so they're easy to catch. And it's classical this time of year, whenever you have a lot of thread fins, that the fish all start gorging out. But it's only a short time period. They're really good right now, but it's short-lived. So in a while that'll start going away. But yes, the fish do look good right now, and the bass look big. Everybody's having fun with the threadfin because they've been dying and really struggling. They're easy to catch, but that's kind of a short-lived. Yes.
You said some of the other lakes didn't have this up and down stuff. What numbers would you have to stock to be more like them?
If I stock that number all the time, this is actually a high number for a lot of states and a lot of lakes. Tennessee, I haven't asked them specifically about their stocking rates, but for decades it's 5 an acre. Doesn't matter what lake it is, where it's 5 an acre.
That's what Kerr is. I'm looking at the chart right here. Kerr is almost double the size of Smith Mountain. It's
more than double.
Almost 50,000 acres. Smith Mountain's 21,000 acres. Kerr gets 5 striped bass per acre. Smith Mountain gets 15 to 18.
But Kerr gets some natural reproduction as well, don't they?
They do get some. Yes.
And you want to catch small stripers, go to Kerr. Right, Dan?
Who makes the call on the number of stocking?
You're looking at it.
Should watch your.
It's all my fault.
Shut
Close that door. We'll close
If you were thinking 0 for this year,
And I wasn't thinking that. If I didn't have you, if this was my own pond in my backyard, that's what I would be doing. I think it would be, it would cause me a lot of grief. A lot of grief.
Yeah.
And people don't understand the dynamics of all this. You have a better understanding, especially people that have to sit here and listen to this every year. You get a little better understanding of at least what I'm thinking.
They don't have to sit, they like to sit, they can't sit.
The general public, when they just hear you're not getting any fish, it doesn't bode very, they don't understand it all, but it's really, it's kind of disturbing for most people if they thought that was going on. And I don't think we need to go to 0. It's just, in my own little playground, I would just try and correct this immediately, as fast as I possibly could, and I'm just not putting anything in until things got better, and then go from there.
Does the hatchery produce less fish when you're gonna stock less, or they just go other places?
It's both. Sometimes they go other places. Now, I didn't tell them that I wanted this number. Everybody puts in their stocking request in the fall. I don't have all the data in by the fall, so I'm the outlier because everybody else puts in their standard number, and the hatchery manager knows that he's not going to get my number until about now or later, when I've got everything fully digested.
So did you say something about Tennessee?
Yeah.
So Tennessee, Cherokee, and I don't know how they compare to Smith Mountain in size, but Cherokee in 2022 got 2 different stockings, about 4 days apart. Total number of about 60,000. Chickamauga? Y'all know what I mean, right? No, Chickamauga.
Okay.
In Tennessee. They got, that lake I know is a huge lake. They got about 150,000.
Historically, they've just done 5 per acre everywhere. And they don't have nearly the striper fishermen compared to here because their numbers are so much lower. You got people that want to fish for them, and they do, but it doesn't have the following because the numbers are so much lower, and it's more challenging. You're not going to be as successful.
Norris is a big lake, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Norris, around 100,000, maybe. But it got like 5 different stockings, like 4 or 5 days apart, each one of them.
That's a bad comparison,
I don't know the size.
though.
And I don't,
Charlotte Lake and
like Norman, our lake is deeper, so there's.
And each one has its own characteristics.
That's right.
I mean, like Lake Anna, for example, that lake is not managed for big fish at all. They can't grow big fish because they don't have the cold water. That's managed strictly to put fish in and people to take them out. So it's a heavy harvested, they got 4 fish limit, they're not trying to make 30 pounders, they're not trying to make 15 pounders. It's dump them in and in a few years they're going right back out. So they have a completely different management objective than what we, yes.
So if I understand what you've been saying here is, our fish size is going down because we don't have the bait, because the fish are eating the bait. Is the bait reproducing normally?
Yes.
So why don't we eliminate the slot limit during the winter? Take the big eaters out.
Because there's not a lot of those left.
Yeah.
We don't have really high numbers of really big fish anyway, and I don't know if you were back far enough.
We've got a lot of teenage fish.
But what we've been catching at night, the past 2 months, they're all 25 to 35 inch fish.
Got a lot of slots this year, which
Yeah,
is good.
if you, I don't know, keep going back, way back. All right, one more, 2 more. I guess another one. Okay, here's what the population looks like. I don't feel like we need to get rid of a bunch of these because this is one of our management objectives is to keep a fair number. Yes, they do eat more, but that's okay. I mean, I don't want to make it all these guys and get rid of everybody else, but this has been an important part of this fishery for a lot of people is having a chance to catch these 10 to 15 pound fish. So
I'm not talking part-time, just for a short period of time until it
well,
rebounds.
if we got rid of some of the extras of those, it still doesn't fix all this. We still have too much of this coming in right now.
Okay.
When did you start doing the boat thing? Putting the fish in?
4 years ago, 5 years ago.
So the survival rate was more successful theoretically. Is this the ripple effect of that?
Now the ripple effect is we've just been putting too many in.
So we want nothing but shoreline planting for the next year. Those trucks get lost on the way.
I don't want to try and purposely make it bad,
But that's based on the science or what you're showing. It was working too well a little while ago.
well, we had too many fish, and so we stocked less, but then back in the years we had a lot of white perch, and that may have been some of the problem. But we had stocking less fish, and actually our survival was really bad. So our numbers were really getting low, and when we were, that big middle block, and remember there was nothing coming in behind it. So when they started moving on and things started getting better, we really were missing a whole bunch of fish. So I was throwing in extra fish,
Sure.
thinking I need to fill up that a little bit, but in reality I really threw too many extra in and filled it up too quick.
Stomped on the gas a little.
Yeah,
Yep.
so I overdid it.
Yep. That makes sense. Only so many mouths and so many things to eat. So.
Yeah. You have one more there? Okay, yeah, we've already been all around this, so go ahead, hit it again. This is kind of if I can end this segment on an upside, right now is when you want to be fishing because, for the next couple of years, I think the fishing should be pretty good. The problem is every time the fishing gets good like this artificially because they're hungry and we don't have enough food, then when we get back to normal, folks aren't so happy that their catch rates went down and the fishing gets tough. Well, the fishing goes back to where it actually should have been all along, but you get spoiled because stripers generally are not a fish that you just expect to go out and catch 20 of them. For most people, it's not like bluegill fishing. It's supposed to be tough and it's supposed to be good days and bad days. But when you get into these situations, it has a tendency to be more good days than bad days. So people get used to it. And then when we can get it back to where it should be, there's a lot of complaints that things have really gone to crap. So it builds expectations that we can't maintain long term. But if there's any good news out of it, don't miss the next couple of years for fishing. Okay. Now I had this slide up to just do what we just did, all this conversation, because I figured there'd be a fair amount of it. Before we go on, does anybody else have any other questions or comments? Yes.
When does bluebacks spawn in this lake?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I know the alewives are mostly, I would think, in their kind of their native runs from the ocean, bluebacks and the alewives are pretty similar.
That's just May.
Yeah, so most of it is in May and early June, so it wouldn't, I would expect that the bluebacks are probably in that same time period.
Do you do your shock? Have you ever thought about doing your shocking and counting in that time frame?
We do
I think it's a tremendous amount of blueback.
There is. I'm not arguing with that at all, and we do see them in our shocking. The problem is with the shad sampling, we need to do that at night, and we're already in the springtime when we need to be doing it. We're trying to do all our bass and crappie work, and we're wound up and trying to get all the lakes and everything done, and we just don't have extra time to try and do that during the spawning time. But if I had more time, I would try and make an effort probably in the springtime at night to do that. We see them in the daytime, but it's real spotty. It'd be a whole lot better at night, but we just don't have the resources.
When did they put the blueback in here?
What's that?
When did they put them in here?
I don't know. The first time I saw them was one of the guides, and I don't even remember what year it is. It's probably 10 years ago, somewhere in there.
That's a good guess. Yep.
It's close to that.
Yep.
I was picking up some striped bass heads at one of the guide stocks, and he said, "Come here a minute." And he had his tank there, and he said, "What is that?" He said, "It's different than those other ones." And he said, "It catches fish better than those other ones, and it's not the same." And I picked it up, and at first I thought, well, that just looks like a big alewife. And then kept looking at it and said, our alewives don't get that big. I'd never seen bluebacks in here, so I thought, well, maybe it is. So I took it back to the lab and actually looked at all the characteristics, and that's what it was. But that was the first time I saw one. That's my estimate, is somewhere around 10 years ago.
One other thing, years ago I've heard this. Roanoke originally with the sewage plants was dumping right into the river, coming into the lake.
To some extent.
And I've been told there's a lot of that had a lot of nutrients in it.
It did.
That was better for the fishing.
Oh yeah.
Now they've cleaned it up.
For the bay.
Yeah.
And they've cleaned it up so we got drinking water.
We have,
and it's
yes, he's referring to something back to let you know how important nutrients are in the system. And it's just like fertilizing your farm field. If you want more corn or tomatoes, you put fertilizer on it. It doesn't mean you can't grow corn or tomatoes without the fertilizer. It just produces more when you have it. It's the same exact thing for fish. The more phosphorus and more fertilizer that comes in the lake, the more algae, plankton, fish you have. Before the sewage treatment plant got cleaned up in Roanoke, they used to collect shad in a different way back then. They would go into coves and kill it all out. Long story. But our production of shad in the lake went from, it was after the cleanup, like 4 or 5 years after the cleanup, after all the dust had settled, we were only producing 10% of the shad that we did before the cleanup. And that's one of the reasons why the fish used to have a lot of fish and they grow really big and fat, because the bait was just through the roof.
Well, I can tell you, on the ocean side, off of Long Island, there's called acid stain. And what it was, it's the sewage from New York City is brought out in barges. Guess what? The best place to go blue fishing.
Yeah, turds floating down the river coming into Smith Mountain Lake is not generally the most accepted and preferred thing by the public. As far as for the fishing part of it, it's really good. It may not smell good, it may not might look good, but it produces the heck out of it.
Okay.
But the reality is we're dealing with.
Hey, John, we had some slides there that I saw that were talking about the number of angler diaries. Were they up there? Did you see that?
That's coming.
Okay, cool. All right, sorry.
All right, so does that cover people's questions? I've just got after this now, I've just got a mishmash of random thoughts and ideas or answering questions that people have asked me over time. Because we went to the electronic version of the diary stuff, I just wanted to throw that up there that we had more diary data returned this year than we have in 20 years.
Good job, guys.
So we got our traditional paper ones back, and then we added some with electronic. So that's been a boost to the system, and that's helped. The one thing for anybody that's done electronically, I don't know who you are. And it may be, some people may be saying, oh, that's the whole idea, is you don't know who I am, and that's okay. We can't send you your meager reward if I don't know who you are. I mean, there's some people I just knew them because I already had corresponded and I knew them because I already had their address. But some people are just, they're anonymous and I don't know who they are, but if somebody wants to stay connected and get their reward back, they can.
Do we need to do something different with the Google form?
You know, if people don't care about the reward and they don't really care if.
I mean, do you need their email address or their mailing address, or what are you missing?
They're either one.
Okay.
I mean, I did electronically, and
Well, actually, I have their email address, so I would need their mailing address.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll send something out.
We can tweak it. It's that's a field.
And it's
We can
not a
fix that.
big deal. It's just that, you know,
That's fine.
those are people, at first I thought, well, they're not gonna get the reward and they're not sending a report, because I send a report out every year to everybody who turned in a diary, which I haven't done yet. Usually I've already done it before this, so a lot of people are already forewarned about what I'm gonna talk about before they come. But this year you didn't get it, so you get a surprise. I just hadn't had time to quite get to it this year, but in any case, I just wanted to make mention of the diaries because of some changes, and it did help us out this year. So it's a good job, and I appreciate the extra help. This was just, I got looking at this data, and just had a question in my mind is, people who fish a lot more, do they have a tendency to catch more fish? I don't mean just, obviously more hours probably means good, but are your catch rates any better? The people on the lake all the time, are they more efficient? So I just plotted it out, and basically, no. Some of these people that put in a lot of hours don't catch any more fish than some of these guys that I just thought that was kind of an odd, interesting little piece of information. So basically, the dots up here in this corner, they didn't fish much, but they did really good when they fished. And way down in this extreme, they fished a lot and they never did much good when they were fishing.
That's me.
Some of the questions about the bait. And this was the question that you asked. I talked last year in a meeting, and we went through this summertime stuff that goes on with the bait and the stripers, so I had a bunch of slides on the summer stuff. But I had a few people ask me about what's happening in the Upper Roanoke this year, so I thought I'd throw that in. Go ahead, next one. Here's kind of what's been going on with our threadfin over time. We had a bunch back years ago, had a little kill, they disappeared, and then we didn't have any threadfin, they were just gone for 8 years. And somebody's brought them back, so here they go. The numbers are marching back up. So our threadfin numbers have gone up pretty high right now. Next. Now in the Upper Roanoke, it's probably a little different in the Upper Blackwater. The shallow water doesn't extend as far. There's a little bit better refuge for the shad. And I haven't been up there, so I don't know what's going on up there. And I expect these effects probably are not as dramatic in that end of the lake. But the Upper Roanoke, when we did our shad sampling last year, this is almost, there was gizzard shad up there, but not that many. Most of them were threadfin shad, and when some of those questions about over time, this is kind of, you can see doesn't change that much. that lake produces a certain number of shad about every year. This is in the, when we do our shad slams in late summer, so the system is refilled at this time. So it's kind of filled up to the brim, about as many as it can hold. And if you got a lot of thread fins, that means you don't have a lot of gizmos. So we went into the fall with this high number of bait in the upper end. Next slide. All of a sudden, that really hard cold front came in December, and those threadfin up there just got walloped. I mean, they either got killed or had to move out. So if they didn't move out and get down the lake far enough where they could get in some deep water to get away from that bitter cold stuff, they died. And the birds were having a feast up there for a while. But essentially, after that winter, December cold snap, this is what you end up with. Just, there is bait, but the numbers are way down. So does the striper want to stay here, or does he want to go back downstream where all the food is? And to be honest with you, a lot of stripers, if they were up at, say, Mormons, and there was ice over the lake, they don't mind cold water, but they'd rather be down lake where it's a little warmer. So a combination of, that's not really their most comfortable zone, and the eats aren't very good, so they move out. So I was seeing stripers in the upper end, decent numbers. I've seen it better in the past, but decent numbers until that thing hit, and then it was just like they vacated. Have you been fishing up there at all? Noticed any of that?
Not fishing nowhere near as much up there this year, just due to it was still bait up there. Mormons held some bait and those gizzards and stuff like that around that. But I remember exactly what you were talking about when it iced over up there. Once you went past the tennis court, you hit ice there for a while.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it just,
it was
but
bad.
people wondered what happened to all that, because usually winter's really good up in that area. There's a lot of stripers who go up there and take advantage of the abundant forage, and it's usually got lots of forage because the stripers hadn't been there for months and months and months, so that's, got much better food sources in that upper end of the lake than in the lower end, so a lot of those stripers move up in the lake where it's been kind of unbothered all summer. But if they did it this year, then after December, they just turned around and head back out. So that's kind of what happened up there. Next one. This is a study that I'm going to try and do this summer. We've been preaching for a very long time about catching fish and releasing fish in the summertime. And we've given different people and had it up here basically showing that in the summertime you release fish and most of them die. And we've had charts. So we've been encouraging people to do not a lot of catch and release in the summer. The club keeps encouraging the folks here. And for the most part, most people have done a really good job. And you folks as a striper community in the club and out of the club have really changed a lot of the habits over the year on how you catch and release fish. A lot of people don't even fish in the summer because they don't want to kill them. A lot of people that do, they just go out, catch their 2 fish, and they quit. Some people do it, but overall, the habits and the way the anglers have fished has really changed a ton in the last 20 years. And most of it's been done because we keep banging you over the head about this stuff, that if you let them go in the summer, most of them are going to die. I've had more recently a lot of conversations with folks fishing in the summer, and some of you guys have been asking really good questions and detailed questions, getting down into the real nuts and bolts about all these other studies and what ifs, and what about this situation and that situation. And I started going over the studies again, and I don't know why I never realized it before, but there was something that stood out to me that I hadn't thought about, is that all the other lakes that have been studied that have kind of come up with all this information that shows summer release is not very good. None of those systems had as much good cold water as we have here in Smith Mountain Lake. There's other lakes that do have cold water, but that's not where these studies were conducted. So it got me thinking. I still think mortality is going to be high in the summer, but it started making me wonder, okay, I've really been hammering you guys for years and years about this, and there's a little glimmer in there that maybe I'm starting to feel a little guilty now that I've stirred you a little bit off. But in any case, just to check and see if things are really the same here as they are in other places. They may be, they may not be. I really don't know going into this how it's all going to look, but I want to give it a check anyway. It's good for you folks to know. It's good for me to know. So I wanted to do this study, basically catch fish in the summertime and put them back and see how many live, and see if we match up with everything else that's happening. So what do I have up there? Pretty much what I've already covered. Okay, go again. Okay, this is what I wanted to do is make this a student study, grad student study, and when we don't have enough time to get all the information we'd like on some of these things, what we traditionally do is a student that's getting his graduate work done, they take on one of these studies and we pay the school to do it, and we get work done that way, and they can dedicate themselves to a project for a couple of years and be a lot more detailed about it. Well, we don't have enough money to fund one of those studies, so I got tired of just waiting around hoping it's going to happen someday, trying to grasp the reality and saying it's probably never going to happen. So if it's going to happen, I got to figure out a way to do it. So I just decided we're just going to go ahead and jump into this and try and make it happen. So this is primarily what we're going to try and look at. Is our mortality the same as those other studies? Does it match up? Is it any different? I'd like to look at young fish for a couple reasons. One is a lot of times in the summer the smaller fish have a tendency to be a little shallower than others. It's not always, but sometimes. If somebody was catching bigger fish in the summer and these little guys survive really well, and you want to be really conscientious, you can get your 2 fish, or just concentrate on the smaller ones that you can let go. And if it's not going to bother them, and you can figure out a way to catch mostly smaller fish in the summertime, then that might be an opportunity. Another thing is, are the really big fish more susceptible than a middle-sized fish? Those are the main things that I think we're going to have time, hopefully, to answer. But that's what I'm going to concentrate on. Okay, we're planning on doing this for 2 summers. We're going to start this year, and we're going to do it again next summer. And we're planning for August, the most extreme time, basically, of the year, because we have limited time and resources. So we're going to try and put all our eggs into the most crucial time of the year and get the extreme. And then do the same thing next year, and we may have a little bit of adjustment next year, depending on what we find this year.
You're gonna put a tag on these fish, an acoustic tag?
Yes, I'm getting to that. That's okay. No, fire away. Don't ask questions. What we're not going to look at is catch and release mortality from something other than the temperatures. We're not going to worry about, at this stage, we don't have the time or the tags to do it. What happens if a fish swallows a hook? Or what happens if you got beat up in the boat or something like that? We're just going to take fish that are in good shape, that they don't have any major problems, and we're going to concentrate on just what happens because of hot weather. So we're not worried about necessarily if the fish dies from that a month later because he swallowed a hook.
Well, I still think that you want to have some constant around how you're handling the fish, meaning
we are going to be very careful.
Take pictures and leave them out of the water all the time.
Oh yeah, it's going to be very controlled. But we're also going to try and replicate what a fisherman would do. We don't want to just reel the fish up with 100-pound test in 2 seconds and just never get him out of the water and just let the hook go. And I mean, we want to try and capture what people would normally do. So it's going to be about the same as somebody just fishing. They catch a fish, they put it up in a net, they grab it out, take a picture, and throw it back. Something about like that same routine is what we're going to do. Because if it doesn't match up with what people are doing, then it doesn't really, the information doesn't really tell us. Okay. Next. And we're going to do this with anglers. There's several ways we can do it, but we're basically hooking up, some of I'll be on a boat, and we have to work through some of the things, but we'll be with people, whether it's a guide or somebody else, but we'll be with people this summer, and when they catch a fish, we take an acoustic tag, and we're going to insert it into their stomach. Nobody's done it that way before, and I looked around trying to figure out a way to attach a tag to a fish quickly, because anytime you sew something on, you know, it takes more time to do it. It's not long, but it's a little bit more time, and then you're introducing another wound. So I was trying to figure out a way to make this as smooth and clean as possible, so I thought, what if I just stick it down their throat? Must be it won't work because nobody's tried it, so it's probably a stupid idea, which means I gotta pursue it. I couldn't leave that idea alone. I couldn't help myself.
So to conduct this study, you figured out a way to get paid while you go fishing.
Sorta. I probably won't be able to hold the pole that much because I'm going to have everything ready. So when something does happen, I've got to. But I'm sure I might be caught with a pole in my hand.
So the hope would be, I would think, that if the mortality rate isn't as bad as you thought, like for bigger fish, and if those graphs showed we didn't have trophy-sized fish, that you leave a slot on during the summer months so that
There's all kinds of things we could do.
Yeah.
I mean,
You got a lot more control over the size of the fish and the fish population.
It potentially could change a whole lot in how we manage, what we tell people to do, how people, you know, what they do out there. You know, if we just said all of a sudden, we said, you know what, it doesn't matter. As long as you're responsible and you do a good job, you know, bring the fish up, you're quick with them, you take good care and do all the right things. It doesn't matter. You can fish all summer, you're going to hurt them.
How many tags do you have to do this?
I have 20.
And that's just for the slate that you're doing for this.
Yep.
So it gives you another tool in the box.
Yes. You know, it could come back and say, it's just like everybody else. And so that whole idea of, you know, you're killing a lot of fish in the summer doesn't change. But, yeah, it could change all kinds of things.
I watched some tournament fishing where there's three guys in there, guy with the camera, the fisherman, and guy with the scale. He catches the fish, weighs it, and throws it right back in. That is excellent. I really like that. It was like my bass.
Yeah, they've changed a lot of tournaments like that.
Hey, Dan? If I caught a fish, 30-inch fish, threw it back in, and it was going to die, would it not eventually float to the surface?
No. And that's been one of the challenges we've had for a long time is, you know, years ago when we were saying, you know, most of these fish aren't going to make it. And the common response was, which is intuitive, and if I was part of the public and didn't see anything else, I would have probably the same conclusion. Well, I was fishing here yesterday, and we caught and released 10, 15 fish around here. We came back today and fished, and there isn't a dead fish anywhere. We're not hurting the fish. Our fish are fine. I heard a lot of that, and I would expect the same thing, but talking to people who've done these other studies, what usually happens is the fish sails right down to the bottom, he crashes in the bottom, rolls over, and that's it, he's done. Most of them don't come up.
They don't bloat.
Well, the problem is when they die in deep water, it's cold enough that no. What makes them bloat is the bacteria working in their system, and it produces oxygen or air, and it stays, instead of releasing it, just builds up in their body cavity. And that, just from the breakdown, and that body cavity blowing up, that's what makes them float. Well, when they're in deep water and it's too cold, that breakdown is so slow that they never build up enough gases inside of them to float. So a fish that's, you know, never really got off the surface or got down 10, 15 feet or crashed in the bottom at 20 foot of water, 15 feet of water where it's still warm, yeah, he's going to pop back up. So a few of them do pop up. But most of them, if you're out there in 60 foot of water and you send a fish down and he hits the bottom at 60 feet, he's probably not coming, and then dies, he's probably not coming back up. He'll be deteriorated before he ever builds up enough gases to float. So that was an interesting tidbit, just knowing people who actually did these studies, and they were surprised that, yeah, they don't show up there. And that's been one of the harder selling points over time. Yes.
Dan, has there ever been a study where you've tried to differentiate between the fish caught in deep water, a mortality rate, or they're busting on top and I'm catching on top. The fish is already up there in that hot water. I mean, there's gotta be a disparity there, I would think. I'm not a biologist. Do we know anything?
There's not much, guys, you can help me out here.
That might be a data point for you to collect.
Well, it is, it will be to some extent. But we usually don't have, does that happen in the summer?
I will add on to that personal experience. When I pull one up, it gets lethargic a lot faster than the fish I caught on top water. He's wild as hell when I put him in the boat. He's wild as hell when I release him. But that fish I pulled out of the deep water, you don't have to sing.
Okay.
So if I'm tight lining or if I'm casting two busting fish, I get different reactions.
You get busted fish in August?
Pardon me?
You get busted fish in
Yeah.
August?
Yeah.
It's getting more prevalent
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
it used to be.
But they're not up there for so long.
Right, right. You can't stay there long.
They're
It has to
quick.
do with their internal
There's not a
temperature.
lot
Yeah,
out there.
when I have this question sometimes, you know, well, if they don't like the cold water, why do they do that? And I kind of relate it to as, you know, if you're really hungry for a Big Mac and it's 100 degrees outside, you can run out to the truck and grab one real quick and run back in the air conditioning and you'll be okay. And the fish will do the same thing. That's why they don't stay up on surface for an hour in the summer.
No.
They come up and they can stay in that warm water for a few minutes, but then they got to go right back down. So they're shooting up, but their core temperature, it takes a while for their body to actually warm up. So they can shoot up into the hot stuff for a short time.
And if you could get real fast at it, you could do a good count on the bluebacks at like that same time. They're just saying.
One call I want to go back to, so you got 20 tags now. On those 20 tags, what size fish are you looking, how many are you looking to put in what size range? I know you're not going to put all 20 and 17-inch fish. Are you going,
I think I'd like to have the bulk of them in that mid-20s, you know,
That's what you
kind of
want
as
the
big as I can get, but then it's gonna be, I want a few of those small fish, and I want, you know, most of the biggest representation, what generally people are catching, you know, that 25 to 30-inch range, and then I'd really like to get some of those fish over 30 inches. And I think that might be the biggest challenge, is actually getting onto those bigger fish when I'm available or we're set up. So that's something probably the biggest thing I'll need help with potentially in the summertime is being able to be on the boat when some of those bigger fish come in the boat in the summertime.
Figure that out, let me know.
Well, I'm just curious, you don't have to get 20 tags, so I'm just,
I have to be careful.
on exactly, the same, so definitely, just curious what range you're going.
It's, you know, my intention is not to put in the first 20 fish that hit the boat.
Oh, definitely,
So
I
it's-
understand that, yeah, I was just
You
curious.
know, that would make me.
You know, just kind of mentally forecasting ahead of time, I would like something like roughly 10 tags, you know, that 25 to upper 20s, close to 30 inches in there, maybe 4 or 5 in those 18 to 21 inches, and then the rest of them in fish over 30. That's kind of what I'd like in perfect scenario. If we can get fish in a boat that kind of matches up with that, that's what we'll end up with.
And also,
Whether we can,
depending on what you catch during that time, too, I understand. I was just curious where you were targeting. I know people are targeting smaller fish or the mid-size or the bigger ones, just see what's around there. So 20 tags isn't really a whole lot.
it's not a lot.
You're $500
But
a
there's
piece.
some, yeah, well, I understand that. That's what
200.
I was just curious where you.
Now, do you expect that fish to die eventually by having a tag in its belly?
Poop it out.
Most of them we think will poop them out. So that's what I expect. If we lost all 20, then it's only 20 fish. You know, people harvest more than that.
Well, that's not what I'm getting at. I'm just thinking as if, like, if you were able to just put a zip tie around the neck of the tail with the transmitter, not go into the belly.
You're
close
still not
enough.
gonna be able to get the transmitter back.
No, I don't want to get the transmitter back, but I don't want the transmitter to kill the fish and give you a false reading.
No, let's see.
48
Go ahead.
48 hours.
Go back a couple. No, go backwards. Okay, one more.
Yeah. Tractor.
Well, anyway, it's doing several at a time. Oh, okay, I already.
Bottom.
at the bottom.
I'm sorry. Talking to these other people and just knowing the habits of these fish, if they're going to die because of that event from you catching them because the water's hot, it usually happens within hours. It's almost always going to happen within a day or so. So we plan on tracking these fish only for 2 days. So I'm not worried about if, you know, there's any problems, you know, if they just aren't acting right or feeding right a month later, because I'm really only after those first couple days.
Okay.
And I'm trying to keep away from doing anything that would detract from their normal ability to get down there and swim around and behave, you know, normally. And having a transmitter in their stomach in the short term isn't going to really change anything about how they're going to behave. Yes.
This is just a general question. In the summertime, is it better to try to revive them by the side of the boat or to just torpedo back in? Are you going to
My best guess, just kind of an educated guess, and I could be wrong, but I would think the faster you can get them to colder water, the better you are. The longer they stay in hot water, the more their core system is heating up and the more jeopardy they're in. So holding them next to the boat, longer period, I would think that would do more harm, because the more that their core body is heating up, the bigger danger they're going to be. So if there's a way to, if it's an option of nose diving them and getting them down quicker or holding on to them for a while, I would think, you know, getting them down quicker would be a better option.
You ever think of the
Water, salt water, we have a descending device we put on.
We're getting to that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that.
Yeah, I'll get there. All right. Okay. What have we done so far? Because I didn't know how this stomach thing would work, and I talked to enough people and nobody could help me out with it. The tagging companies couldn't help me out with it, so because I couldn't leave a dumb idea alone. I went ahead and got some people on the lake in January. I said, I'm going to see if this will actually work or get a good idea of it. So we got some guys around the lake and tried to get a number of boats at one time. We got hatchery trucks, we got some boats to run the fish around, hold fish in tanks and stuff, and got people to catch fish for me. I wanted mid-sized stripers, and so we got 6 fish. I had 4 tags, but I got this from the company. They were dummy tags. They were just a replica of the real thing, so they had no guts in them. It was just something that looks like this. It had nothing in it, so I could buy them for $25 a piece. So I got those. I got 4 of those dummy tags. We took 6 fish back to the hatchery. I put my 4 tags in them. I only had 1 tag pass, and it took 4 days to do that. We could only hold them. We only held them for 6 days. Stripers do really bad in captivity. They stress terrible. I was talking to somebody earlier. You can take a bass or a crappie and throw it in your aquarium and give them something to eat, and they're just fine. You cannot keep a striper in a small, maybe a huge aquarium, but in the hatchery tanks and stuff, they just stress out. You can put feed in, all kinds of bait. They won't touch it. They won't leave it. They just wither away in there. So we have a limited time. I mean, ideally, I would have left them in there for 2 months. But the reality is they just stress out and don't make it. The hatcheries can't even keep them in there for broodstock. If they try and keep a walleye or a striper in one of those tanks too long, they stress out so bad that even if they're alive, their eggs go to crap. Their whole system just starts breaking down. So we had a limited amount of time. We had to take 2 fish out early, like 3 days afterwards, one on 3 day, one on day 5, because they were starting to stress so bad and they were starting to roll over, so we just got them out of there and sent them to the river. But we had one tag pass in 4 days, and then at the end of 6 days, one of the tags was still in. So nothing left quicker than a couple-day time frame. I was looking for at least 3 days to give myself a buffer. So putting them in the stomach seems like it's going to work. So that's where we're headed right now. Okay. I found some old tracking equipment. That was going to be a hurdle because I didn't have any money to buy tracking equipment. I wrote down 40 tags.
20 for this year, 20 for next.
You know, I do have 40 tags that I just ordered. I was said 20 earlier, but I do have 40. I was
20 a
originally,
year.
the only equipment I could get was from a company, and to buy their tags, they were twice as much. So they're going to be $400 a tag, and I was only going to be able to get 20. I finally found some equipment somewhere else for another company, and I could get theirs for 200. So I doubled my tag number by finding this other equipment. And I'm gonna play with some of these tags later on in the spring before August actually gets here.
Cool.
So that's the plan. And here's what the tags look like. I got a couple different sizes because going into this I wasn't sure exactly what the setup was going to be, but the tags we're using are going to be pretty close to that one. They won't be as long as this one is, but that's it. This is, when I was a kid, we called them a pill pusher. It's for agriculture, for cows and stuff. You put the pill in the end and stick it down the throat. Well, this size one fits right in the end of those knives, so that's how we're going to insert them in the stomach. This is the old equipment that I got. This is a descender. So you guys were talking about, and I had somebody call me from the club that was newer in the club, and I don't remember who it was, a year or so ago, and said, I just came from so-and-so, and from where I'm from, we used to use these things to send fish back down. Is that you?
They're mandated in some parts of the Gulf for certain fish.
Yeah, for marine stuff, it's very important. And I told the person, I said, I don't think it's an issue for here. Right. And if the fish is going to go down on its own, I don't think hooking them up to this and sending them down is going to make much of a difference. If you can put him back in the water and he's going to be back down to depth and all on his own with no help in 15 seconds, I don't think the extra time of hooking him up onto this and sending him down is going to do any good. And I still kind of think that way. But I went ahead and bought one of these descenders for the summertime because I don't know what's going to happen. Because I know maybe if I was out there catching big fish in the summertime more, maybe I would know, but I don't. That brings me to another point. Next slide. Does anybody, if you fish deep, have you ever had a fish that you've caught in deep water and you can't get it to go back down?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Well, I don't usually catch big fish, and I don't usually fish deep. So for me, it's kind of out of mind for me. I haven't had that experience, and I haven't heard a lot of people talking about it. Well, I've had it happen twice to me this winter, and I don't even fish that much. I've had slot fish that I got up. One was a whole lot bigger than I'm normally catching, so trying to reel him up, my rig wasn't set up to crank him up really fast, and the water's not warm. So I wasn't that big a hurry, but by the time I got him in and tried to let him go, he couldn't get down. He would work around on the surface, but he just didn't have enough energy to sound by himself. So we had to play with him for a long time. But this got me thinking because of the descender and this experiment and all that. I would highly recommend now, after my experience, that if you do deep water fishing at all, and after I checked with several people who fish, wintertime and deep quite a bit, and I said, have you ever happened to this? Oh yeah, I had it happen once. Did you ever oh yeah, I had, not very often, but it did happen, and I thought, well, I didn't know that much about it, but apparently all these guys that do this have it happen occasionally, so I would recommend if you fish deep, that you actually, in the wintertime, that you would actually have some kind of descending vise. Go ahead. Have one available, and you can make them really cheap. Go ahead. Run the light. For you that don't, if you don't know what happens, basically, the fish's air bladder, that blue thing right there, they use that to stay neutrally buoyant. So they adjust the air in that bladder so that whatever depth they want, they choose to be in, it keeps them floating right at that level, and they don't have to fight to stay down or stay up. So they can put just enough air in there. If they want to be at 20 feet or 80 feet, they can stay there without fighting. The problem is, the deeper you go, the more that condenses. So if that fish has got that air bladder with that amount of gas to keep him regulated at 70 feet, and you pull him up to the surface, all of a sudden that thing's 5 times the size, and it makes him float. And he's got to get back down to depth where the pressure, the water pressure, condenses that back down without going into all the physics. It's basically that amount of air on the surface makes him float. You have to get him back down there. So you can take that device and push him right back down to where he goes, where he's supposed to be, where his bladder would be normal again, and he'll do fine. Something else.
There was a kit, I think I still have it, there was a kit out for a while, that actually was like a very thin needle.
Yes, you can fizz them. We can,
Yeah,
I would,
But then you poke the hole in it.
I would recommend, they do it all the time for bass tournaments, and I did it for the fish we took to the hatchery.
I still got one.
So all the fish that we took to the hatchery, they got them out of 60 to 70 feet of water. And so we put them in our tanks in the boat, because it's on the surface, none of them would go open. Left them in, they're all upside down. So I did that, I fizzed every one of them so that they could go upright. And they all lived through it fine. But we basically opened up 2 of the fish from our tag stuff that were starting to get a little bit uneasy in the tanks that were starting to go sideways, and they had tags in them, so I wanted to see what it looked like anyway and what happening inside, get the tags back. We cut them open and nobody had any inflated air bladders. And so I don't know if that's because they were staying on the surface and they needed no air in them, or because they were damaged enough that they still couldn't put it. But a striper, for him to get back down in deep water in the summertime, he's got to put air in that thing pretty quick. Otherwise, he's going to be fighting all the time. So because of that, what I saw, I wouldn't recommend fizzing with the stripers. Now, bass, you could fizz them potentially, and if they could heal up in a few weeks, they can hang out in shallower water until they need, they don't have to go
At this, in fishing in Roanoke at the boat show, or I got it from Mike here on the lake, somebody was handing these things out.
Dwayne was. Dwayne at Captain.
Yeah, Mike's talked about it.
And they still use them for bass all the time, but I wouldn't recommend them for stripers. And if you're letting the fish go, see, the guys in the tournaments have to do it because they're putting them in their live wells and they're upside down and they're holding them to the end. So they fizz them to keep them alive in their live wells. It's a little bit different scenario. If you're letting the striper go, you don't have to worry about keeping them in the live well. And after what I saw, I would just recommend using a descending device, which go ahead. Which you can buy them. Here's a couple commercial ones right here. You can buy them, or you can just go on YouTube and make one for 50 cents. I mean, they got all kinds of designs that you can make easily. But I would highly recommend any, from my experience, now that I know it's occasionally an issue. And I know I was uncomfortable to have a big fish that I couldn't get down. I didn't want to see that fish die. I wanted him to live. And I wished I had it to do over again and had something to put him down with. Okay, go ahead. Fish heads. I've been talking way too long, so I'll try and keep this wrapped up pretty quick. Essentially, this is a piece of paper that looks just like we hand out. I had a bunch of them. I had them at the freezer. If you give me any fish heads and put them in the freezers, there's a piece of paper that's usually available in the freezers. This is printed on a special paper. It's kind of a wax paper, so it's water resistant. It's not waterproof, but the information you can put on this, and then you can stick it right in their mouth. That's the best way. Chad said, well, why don't you tell people some of this after this summer's experience? If you just take a regular piece of note paper, write it on there and wad it up, and it gets all wet, it just goes to mush. So some of them we couldn't read. Right. You just pull it out, and it's just
Then there were some that had like 3 heads in one bag, and there was one piece of paper that said 27-inch fish, 25-inch fish.
Yeah.
Nope. It's surprising how close a 30-inch fish and a 24. It's so surprising how close. Yeah. And we had to make some judgments, and it was interesting.
But this paper, you don't have to worry about getting it wet. I mean, you can't just throw it and wait forever. It will eventually break down. But if you just fold it up and stick it in your mouth, it doesn't ever come out, and that's the best way to do it. It's just always right with the fish, right where it needs to be. We don't lose it, doesn't get confused. You don't have to write it on another piece of paper or something like that, and it solves the problem of doing that. So we have I've always kept a bag of these in the freezers, and nobody ever uses them, maybe because they don't know they're there or whatever. And when you fill this out, all I need is this green information. If I don't have a link and I don't have a date, then I'm not going to use it, because there's sometimes people keep a fish, they've had it in their freezer for 2 years. And when I'm reading that OLIT, it makes a difference whether it was caught in March or September, trying to read it and figure out what everything means. So I need those 2 pieces of information. This other stuff is so I can send you back the information. I'll send you back the age of the fish if you tell me who it came from. If you don't want to tell me, and I got a length and a date, I'm good.
Another preferred method, if you don't have this special paper, if you are using just a piece of regular paper, write the info that he's asking for on the paper, put it in a sandwich baggie, like a little Ziploc sandwich baggie, and then shove that in the fish's mouth.
So that keeps it from getting wet and just disintegrating.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to be doing a creel survey and angler survey on the lake this year, and so if you're out on the lake much, you're probably going to get approached by a boat that says, I want to ask you some questions. It's a 5-minute process, and if you would please help out and provide the information they're asking for. Go ahead. There's a bunch of information we get from it. I just thought this might be some of the most interesting. The last survey we did, 39% of the fishing effort going on in the lake. This is during the daytime for most months. So the reality is, if you include nighttime and winter, 12 months a year, that number's probably high. But of course, black bass, there's more of those, but striper fishermen, there's a lot of them out there, a lot of pressure. Go ahead.
So the other 4% didn't know what they were fishing for.
There was another species in there, and then there was, yes, and we do get that, well, what are you fishing for? I'm fishing for anything. And so you pin them down and find out, well, they really like to catch a bass, and that's kind of what they're doing. But sometimes you got grandpa out there with his kid, and they're just throwing a bobber and a worm or something. They're just throwing in some spinner they got at Walmart, and they don't know. They're just throwing and hope something bites. So yeah, there is a few I didn't put on. And we ask personal questions about what you spend, and I hate asking this when I'm on the lake. I mean, I just really don't like driving up to somebody and saying, how much money did you spend today? I don't like getting that personal, but it makes a difference for us. Because when folks say, is the fishery that important? Is the stocking program that important? It really is. And it ends up being like 70 or 80% of this money is spent in the local economy. So when you tell somebody, yeah, that's, they spent $6 million just to go fishing last year during this time period, and so the reality is they're spending over $10 million just to go fishing, and most of it's spent in this area. That's a big deal, and of course, folks that live around here, that there's all kinds of businesses all around here that are only here because people come here to fish, and you take that component away and a lot of it goes down. But just during that time period last year, this $2.5 million spent just on striper fishing. I put this slide up. Primarily, this is my dog over time, which for some reason she has a tendency to catch more and bigger than me. So she does like to remind me of that. And I do fish occasionally, but I just wanted to make the point, not to show all these pictures of us, but even though I don't do it that much, and I don't do it like this much, but I striper fish also. I'm also on the lake, and so I'm not doing this purely from a scientific standpoint. I see the angler side of it too, and I am part of that community. It's not as much as I like to, but I'm coming at this, from a little bit of an understanding from an angler's point of view too.
Would your daughter sell me a fish occasionally?
Does she fish with you or somebody else?
Oh, she goes with me.
Oh. So
She
you're
goes
just
with me and she catches the fish.
you're just bad luck.
I'm the chauffeur.
You're a good dad then.
Yes.
Today I came over Lake Marion, and just out of curiosity, my wife brought it up on Google, average depth is 13 feet, yet they stock striped bass. How does a striped bass live in 13 feet of water in North Carolina?
South Carolina.
South Carolina? South Carolina.
Well,
And that's the mid of South Carolina. That's the devil's armpit. And it's hot.
Yeah, so how do they survive?
It is, there's a whole lot of thing about hydrology and the way lakes work and all that. But the whole lake isn't 13 feet deep. You've got a lot deeper water, and stripers during the most crucial time are using a limited amount of that lake. And I don't know that lake very well. But they're not living in 13 feet of water all summer. Yeah. I don't know how to answer that question, but I know it's a bigger picture than just 13 feet. I don't know if anybody else is more familiar with the lake.
It's almost 100,000 acres of water.
Yeah. And there's some deeper areas in it,
And
but
there's
that's where a lot of fish
stumps,
use.
you know, here in 3 feet of water.
Yeah, there's
you know,
probably
you average all that.
just so you know, the history knows the history of the striped bass and how it became known to be able to survive in freshwater was when Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie were being built back in the 40s. The stripers were up the river. They knew that the stripers were up the river spawning. They built the dam, they locked them in, and the biologists thought, they'll die, no big deal. They didn't. Years later, fishermen were having their rod, their line broken by these fish, and they realized that not only did they live, but they survived and thrived there. So that was like back in the 40s, maybe. I'd have to go back and look. I did a lot of research, and you can thank Lake Marion and Moultrie for basically the genesis of the freshwater
And
striped
then the
bass.
same thing happened to Kerr Reservoir.
Yes, yes.
They had two lakes that happened naturally where the fish survived and reproduced, and they got people going, maybe I could use some of those. And that kind of started the whole process. And it's gone from then to what it is today, to people using striped bass and these big systems that have lots of bait.
John, my article's on the striped bass, the Smith Mountain Striper page, right, in the website. That paper that I wrote?
I haven't posted to the website yet.
Okay.
If I wore you out,
Yes.
And one question, when you were talking about the mortality, would it be beneficial for the members to, if we see a fish floating somewhere, get a length and approximate weight and give it to you, or is it just too many variables?
Yeah. I don't think that helps our data set much.
Okay. I just didn't know if somebody coming up in a certain area
Now,
would
if
give
you
you any
wanted to
data.
go ahead and get a length and a weight, and then cut the head off the rotten fish and bag it all up for you. Then I'll
Give it to Chad. Give it to Chad.
Yeah, give it to Chad. I have had them come back green and slimy, and most people don't do that, but I have had those happen.
Run around the back of the truck a couple days before we got in the freezer.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Why is it illegal to sell shad, either via threadfin or gizzards on the lake, like the marinas, the bait people, that they have the bait tank? What's the, why is it illegal to sell shad?
Those kind of decisions and rules were made way over my head from somewhere else, but the general principle is most state agencies and all that don't want any of the freshwater fish, wild fish, to be sold or available on the market because it leads to heavy exploitation. It's not the ocean, and it's a very limited resource. So if you just said, okay, you can make $10 a bucket of shad, the number of people out there would be throwing and putting out lights and throwing nets for shad. In some areas, it could potentially cause some major issues. But putting anything on a commercial market in the freshwater systems usually has been taboo, just because the way they get abused and the potential risks of, and we came from the era way back, in the 1800s and early 1900s, where we exterminated most of our wildlife around the country for commercial purposes. And so since most of those issues have been corrected, it's a general rule that, for most things in freshwater systems, they just don't allow them to be open for commercial. And I don't know if that fully answers how that particular regulation got, because there are some exceptions occasionally.
Well, yeah, like trout. I mean, you can go to a hatchery and.
But those aren't in the wild.
As long
You
as you
can't
have
take a
a-
wild trout out and sell it, but
No.
you can raise them in a hatchery. You can raise shad, if you could do it in a hatchery, you could raise them and sell them, but you can't raise them in a hatchery.
So live bait sold around the lake, are they shiners or something
Yeah,
else?
so those are all raised in, commercial places, and that's fine.
And what do the stripers think of them?
I think a striper would eat
Anything?
any of it if he's hungry.
It's expensive, really.
Now, there's obviously sometimes if they've got plenty to eat. I mean, if you're at a buffet bar and you have your option, you're gonna pick certain things. And if the fish is well fed and he's got lots of options, he may say, I'm not, no shiners today. But yeah, I know that people do catch them.
I would suggest if you do, you take that receipt and you burn it, because you're paying $1 for every one of those. Don't let your wife see it.
I had a striper last, I think it was like last April. It's fairly nice size striper. When I pulled it out, it was like bleeding out the side. No injury or anything like that, just blood kind of coming out the side. Any idea what was wrong with that fish?
No. Out from
No,
its
it was
gill?
it was on the sides.
It's
You know,
actually
about
bleeding?
halfway back, yeah.
Maybe small.
So I got them unhooked and so forth. The whole back of the boat was bloody.
No idea.
Was he deep when you caught him?
Sharks
No,
in the lake.
It was in Becky's.
No idea.
Betty's or Becky's, and it was about halfway down through. So
Blood wasn't running out of his gills and down.
Thank you.